The queer history of Weimar Germany. Before the Nazis, before the darkness, there was Weimar Germany, a time when Berlin was the queer capital of the world. Picture it, the 1920s. Jazz spilling from cabarets, drag queens walking openly through the streets, same-sex bars packed shoulder to shoulder. Doctors wrote books arguing homosexuality was natural. Artists, soldiers, writers, they all found freedom in the chaos that came after World War I. For a few short years, Berlin lived decades ahead of its time. But that freedom carried a price. When the regime changed, the same lists used to study gay life became lists for arrest. So how did a city so free turn into a nightmare overnight? Tell me the exact time you're watching Morning Coffee or Midnight Dive. If this story pulled you in a tap like so, the next one reaches a little farther. Berlin, 1920. The city hums like an overworked machine and purrs like a cat at the same time. You step out of the train station, the air thick with coal smoke, perfume, and possibility. Someone once said, Berlin never truly sleeps, and you can feel it immediately. There's jazz bleeding from the cafes, cabaret girls walking arm in arm with men in tuxedos, and a boy with eyeliner selling newspapers on the corner. Welcome to Weimar Germany, the place where the world came undone and somehow also came alive. The war is over, at least on paper, but the peace is shaky. Inflation eats the German mark faster than a Berliner eats strudel. Veterans limp past glittering shop windows filled with French silk and American cigarettes. Everything feels improvised, temporary, alive, in spite of itself. And beneath the chaos, a quiet revolution is brewing. Not political, not military, but personal. You walk down Friedrichstrasse and notice the signs El Dorado Cafe, Dorian Gray silhouette. The letters glow in pink and blue neon, the kind that makes the fog shimmer. These aren't ordinary night spots. They are sanctuaries hidden, yet not really hiding. Men dance with men here. Women share cigarettes and glances that could light a fire. And though the law technically forbids it, the police often look the other way, because even they can't resist the tips, the glamour, the sheer electricity of it all. It's hard to explain how radical this moment is unless you imagine it. 100 years before Pride Month, Berlin already has a scene. There are drag performers, queer writers, trans people walking the streets under their chosen names. One of them, Lili Elba, an artist from Denmark, comes here to live as herself long before words like transgender exist. Another, Magnus Hirschfeld, runs the world's first institute for sexual science just a few streets away, where he studies sexuality with the seriousness most men reserve for physics. Inside his institute, you'd find things no one else dared display: books on same-sex love case studies, on gender identity, even letters from soldiers who wrote, "Doctor, I don't understand why I'm not like the others." Hirschfeld reads every one of them. He believes that sexuality is part of human diversity, not a disease, and that belief alone makes him one of the most dangerous men in Germany. But you wouldn't know that from the streets. Out here, Berlin is celebrating. Every night feels like the end of the world and the start of a new one. The cabaret halls fill up with soldiers, secretaries, poets, and politicians, all shoulder to shoulder, pretending for a few hours that rules don't exist. You find yourself in a place called El Dorado, where the tables are crowded, the air is smoky, and the band is halfway through a tune that sounds like trouble. A performer walks on stage, a tall, elegant woman with a deep voice that could melt glass. She winks at the crowd, then sings Ich bin von Kopf bis Fuß auf Liebe eingestellt. The room erupts. You glance around and realize something stunning. Everyone is watching. Everyone. Gender, class, identity. It's all blurred into a golden haze. Berlin, in the Weimar years is a paradox. On one side, hunger and humiliation, on the other, liberation and laughter. The same city that can't feed its children somehow feeds the freest nightlife Europe has ever seen. Maybe that's what happens when a society breaks. It stops pretending. And you can feel that tension in the smallest moments. A soldier clinks glasses with a writer who'll later pen a scandalous novel about forbidden love. A woman dressed as a man helps another light her cigarette. Two strangers kiss under the street lamp, then vanish into the fog before anyone can decide whether it was brave or foolish. Magnus Hirschfeld calls this the third sex, a phrase that shocks the polite world, but thrills the underground. He means that love and gender can't be trapped in categories. His institute even hosts public lectures attended by curious students and scandalized aristocrats alike. Why should nature care about your laws, he asks. It is not a question most people are ready to answer. Still, the Weimar Republic gives him room to ask it. The new constitution guarantees freedom of expression, and Berlin's police, tired of raiding every dance hall, develop a policy of moral tolerance. It's not exactly protection, but it's enough to let something extraordinary happen. Queer life begins to exist in daylight. Newspapers publish columns for gay readers. Films flirt with same-sex themes. There's even a weekly magazine called Die Freundin, the Girlfriend, for lesbian women, sold right next to gossip papers. Of course, not everyone celebrates. In Parliament, conservatives rage about moral decay. In beer halls, angry veterans mutter about degenerate art and perversion. You can almost feel the storm gathering. But for now, Berlin doesn't care. It's too busy dancing, laughing, inventing new ways to be human. And so you walk home through streets still wet from rain, the cobblestones glinting like mirrors. Behind every window, someone is writing, painting, kissing, living too loudly for their own safety. The world calls this decadence. You could just as easily call it survival. Morning breaks over Berlin with a hangover and a heartbeat. The sunlight cuts through the haze of cigarette smoke that's never quite left the city. You walk past newspapers fluttering on stands, headlines about cabinet crises, assassinations, and inflation. But the real story is happening behind closed doors in classrooms, clubs, and clinics. For the first time in modern history, people are beginning to study not suppressed desire. You find yourself standing before a grand building near Tiergarten, the Institut für Sexualwissenschaft, the Institute for Sexual Science. Founded in 1919 by Dr. Magnus Hirschfeld, this is no secret society. It's a public beacon, a temple to science, and a safe house disguised as a research center. The front door creaks open, and you step into what feels like the future. Inside, shelves sag under the weight of thousands of books about the body, love and identity subjects long banned or whispered about. Glass cases display medical models and photographs carefully labeled. The air smells faintly of paper coffee and the strange calm of being allowed to exist. Hirschfeld believed that understanding sexuality scientifically, not morally, would free society from fear. It sounds quaint now, but in 1920 it's radical. In one room, a secretary types letters from men across Europe who beg for advice. My parents don't understand me. I want to live as a woman. Is there a cure for being me? Hirschfeld answers them with patience, compassion, and data. There is no cure, he writes gently, because there is no disease. The Institute is more than a laboratory. It's a lifeline. Here, queer people can talk openly with doctors who don't treat them as criminals or curiosities. They can change their legal documents, receive counseling, or simply sit in peace among others who understand. For some, it's the first place they've ever used their real name. You peek into a lecture room where Hirschfeld stands before an audience of young students, his round glasses glinting in the light. Nature, he says, is rich. Humanity is richer. Behind him, charts show data from decades of interviews. He points to one labeled "Earnings and Uranians," archaic terms for homosexual men and women. We are as natural as the left-handed, he declares, and the crowd laughs partly at his audacity, partly from relief. Outside the Institute, not everyone is laughing. Conservatives call him the most dangerous man in Germany. Church leaders condemn his work as heresy. Street pamphlets mock him as Dr. Sex. But Hirschfeld doesn't flinch. He travels across Europe giving lectures, carrying a suitcase full of slides and conviction. If we don't speak, he says, others will speak for us. And others do. Berlin's queer culture isn't limited to the rich or educated. It's woven into everyday life. In working-class neighborhoods, drag balls draw crowds of hundreds. At Café Adler, a waiter slips coded invitations for underground dances to regular patrons. Even the newspapers have a column listing friendly gatherings where like-minded people can meet discreetly. You wander into one such gathering at a modest apartment in Schöneberg. The curtains are drawn, but the laughter is bright. A gramophone hums in the corner, and a small group of men and women share wine and cigarettes. One of them, a writer named Christopher Isherwood, is taking notes in the corner. He's English young and fascinated by Berlin's freedom. It's a city where anything can happen, he'll later write, and he's right. For many who come here, artists, refugees, dreamers, Berlin is a kind of refuge. The Weimar government, with its liberal constitution, has quietly become the most tolerant state in Europe. Paragraph 175. The law against homosexuality still exists, but enforcement is inconsistent, and Hirschfeld is lobbying to repeal it entirely. For a brief, glittering moment, it feels possible. You stop by Die Freundin, the lesbian magazine that sells out weekly at newsstands. Its editor, Sally Engler, publishes stories, advice columns, and classifieds for women seeking women. "Love is love," one headline declares. Another reads, "We are not afraid." The covers are stylish, the tone confident. Imagine walking past that in 1924, it would have felt like holding the future in your hands. By nightfall, the city's two sides meet again, the intellectual and the instinctual. You follow the sound of a piano into a cabaret near Alexanderplatz. Inside, performers mix philosophy with parody. One act mocks politicians by dancing in uniforms. Another turns a lecture on psychology into a bawdy song. Between sets, the MC, a tall man in pearls, raises a glass to the science of pleasure and winks. The crowd roars approval. Berliners understand the contradiction they're living in. They know that while one half of the country debates morality, the other half lives it. Weimar, someone jokes, is a republic by day and a cabaret by night. And in a way, that's true. The daylight belongs to politics and protest. The night belongs to reinvention. You step outside after midnight, the cool air slicing through the smoke. The streetcars still rumble, carrying home dancers, soldiers, nurses, and dreamers. On a nearby wall, someone has scrawled graffiti in chalk. "Freedom is fragile, hold it tight." You wonder who wrote it. Maybe a student from Hirschfeld's Institute. Maybe someone from the cabaret. Maybe just a passerby who knew how easily joy can be erased. But tonight, Berlin feels indestructible. And for the people who found themselves here, that illusion of permanence is enough. You wake to the sound of streetcars rattling through Potsdamer Platz, their wheels clanging like alarm clocks for a restless city. The year is 1925, and Berlin has become the epicenter of everything scandalous, hopeful, and heartbreakingly fragile. The newspapers call it the New Babylon. The churches call it hell on earth. But if you're queer, it feels like paradise with a curfew. The mornings are sober, bureaucratic, almost dull Berlin, pretending to be respectable. But by dusk, the masquerade begins again. Cafes transform into theaters. Theaters turn into nightclubs. And the nightclubs, well, they turn into something that would make Freud raise an eyebrow and take notes. You find yourself walking toward the district of Schöneberg, now known as the beating heart of queer Berlin. Its streets are lined with bars like Mikado, Silhouette, and El Dorado, where neon lights flicker through the fog like stage lamps. It's hard to overstate how revolutionary this is. Just a few blocks from government offices, men in tuxedos are dancing with men in silk gowns, and no one's pretending it's a joke. Inside El Dorado, the air is thick with cigarette smoke and cologne. The crowd is a kaleidoscope of classes, factory workers beside poets, soldiers, beside aristocrats, all blurring into the same glittering hum. On stage, a drag performer with a painted mustache sings a torch song in perfect falsetto. The audience sways. A waiter delivers cocktails with names like The Third Sex and Freedom Fizz. You take a sip. It tastes like defiance and gin. And there's something electric in the air, something beyond pleasure. For many here, this isn't just nightlife, it's a political act. Every dance is a declaration, every kiss an argument against invisibility. Hirschfeld's Institute might write the theory, but these bars and cabarets are living laboratories. In a corner booth sits Anita Berber, one of Berlin's most infamous performers. Pale, fierce, and wrapped in red silk, she looks like sin and salvation combined. Her dances mix nudity, death, and satire, an art form that horrifies conservatives and fascinates everyone else. My body, she once said, is a weapon. And in a way, it is. Her existence alone challenges a society desperate to return to normal. Beside her sits Sebastian Drost, her collaborator and lover, dressed like a fallen angel in velvet. Together, they represent Weimar's most dangerous luxury, freedom of expression. In their art, gender is fluid identity theatrical and morality negotiable. You can see why the rest of Europe is obsessed with Berlin, terrified and envious in equal measure. The cabaret world becomes a mirror for the Republic itself. Bright, bold, but cracking under pressure. Songs about politics get disguised as love songs. Love songs double as social commentary. When the MC jokes Weimar is just another word for hangover, the crowd roars with laughter that sounds a bit too knowing. By 1927, queer life in Berlin is no longer underground, it's fashionable. Postcards depict same-sex couples with cheeky captions. Novels like The Artificial Silk Girl and The Berlin Stories capture the city's sexual ambiguity. Even cinema joins the movement. The film, different from the others, co-written by Hirschfeld himself, tells the story of a gay violinist destroyed by society's hypocrisy. It's banned almost immediately, but not before drawing packed houses and whispers of revolution. You attend a private screening one evening in a cramped attic room. The projector hums, the film flickers, and the audience sits in tense silence. When the final scene fades, Hirschfeld himself appearing to plead for compassion. Someone quietly wipes their eyes. You realize this is more than art. It's testimony. It's proof that a generation has begun to tell its own story before anyone else can erase it. But not everyone is clapping. Outside this bubble of glitter and jazz, resentment festers. Unemployment remains high. Veterans feel betrayed, and extremist parties are learning how to weaponize moral panic. The far-right press brands Berlin's queer culture as evidence of national decay. The homosexual conspiracy one tabloid blares is destroying German virtue. You'd laugh if you didn't already sense the chill creeping in. Still, the party goes on. The music gets louder. The costumes get wilder. Berlin refuses to blush. You pass a group of sailors sharing a cigarette with drag queens outside a club laughing like brothers. A violinist tunes up in the street playing Schubert for tips. Somewhere nearby, a policeman leans against a wall watching with a smirk instead of a whistle. In the corner of El Dorado, an American journalist scribbles notes for a future bestseller. His name is W.H. Auden, and he's fallen in love with the city's audacity. Weimar, he'll later write, was the last great dance before the darkness. As the night deepens, you begin to understand what he meant. The freedom here feels both infinite and fragile, like champagne bubbles that could burst any moment. You watch a couple dance, two men in white shirts, one resting his head on the other's shoulder. They move slowly, tenderly, unaware or uncaring of who's watching. The band plays softer, almost reverently. Berlin, for now, still belongs to the dreamers. The lights glow, the laughter rises, and the world outside, the hungry, angry world, waits in silence, gathering its breath. Freedom always feels infinite right until the moment someone decides it isn't. It's 1930 now, and the glitter of the cabarets no longer hides the cracks beneath. The rent is still due, the mark's still unstable, and politics is turning uglier by the week. Posters plastered across Berlin scream about moral corruption and national renewal. The laughter from El Dorado carries down the street. But this time there's tension underneath it. You can feel the air shifting like the city itself is holding its breath. You walk past the cafes that once buzzed with avant-garde chatter and notice the tone has changed. The jokes are quieter, the toasts shorter. Outside the Institute for Sexual Wissenschaft, a small group of men in brown uniforms hand out leaflets warning of perversion. The same people who used to come to cabaret shows for amusement now speak of cleansing and order. The word degenerate appears in headlines more often than democracy. Inside Hirschfeld's institute still hums with life, but just barely. The doctor himself has grown older, tired, but determined. He knows the wind has turned against him. Science will outlive ignorance, he says, half to his staff, half to himself. His lectures are fewer now, his audience is thinner. But he keeps the doors open for those who have nowhere else to go. Men caught by the police, women denied medical help, young people searching for words to describe who they are. In one corner office sits a young assistant named Karl Giese Hirschfeld's companion, an archivist. He's cataloging thousands of case files, each one a life story. A soldier who fell in love with his comrade, a woman who dressed as a man to keep her job a family, who begged society to leave their child alone. Giese knows they can't protect everyone, but he files each document carefully anyway, perhaps hoping that truth itself might one day be armor. Across town, the cabaret scene is still roaring, but now it feels more like defiance than celebration. Comedians mock politicians openly. Singers weave protest into love songs, and the audiences, half drunk, half frightened, laugh too hard, too long. In smoky corners, whispers spread. The Nazis are gaining seats. They'll shut this all down. No, Berlin will never let them. You walk into Mocha FD, one of the city's most famous clubs. Once a temple of hedonism, now it feels like a bunker of denial. The band plays louder, as if trying to drown out the speeches echoing from the radio in the next room. A drag performer steps on stage dressed as a politician, parodying speeches about purity. The crowd howls with laughter, but it's nervous laughter. Everyone knows the joke is real. Meanwhile, Hirschfeld leaves Germany for a lecture tour in France, hoping distance might buy time. In his absence, newspapers publish caricatures of him, a Jewish corrupter, a moral disease. The threats pile up. One morning, his staff find graffiti scrawled across the Institute's gates, "We will burn it." It's the first time the city flinches. But even then, Berlin doesn't stop being Berlin. You still hear music spilling from the clubs, still see couples walking arm in arm under the street lamps, still sense the stubbornness that built this strange, brilliant freedom. For the people who've tasted it, going back to silence is unthinkable. You visit a cafe where writers gather to argue about politics. Among them sits Christopher Isherwood, now a little older, sipping cheap wine and jotting in his notebook. Across from him, Jean Ross, the cabaret singer who will inspire his character. Sally Bowles adjusts her green nail polish and says, "Berlin's the only city where you can be anyone for now." That for now hangs heavy in the air. Outside, the posters multiply. The Nazi Party marches through the Brandenburg Gate chanting about purity, order, and discipline. They promise job stability and a return to decency. And for millions of desperate, exhausted Germans, it sounds like salvation. For others, especially those who've built their lives in the fragile light of Weimar's tolerance, it sounds like the end of the world. You walk home past the Institute one last time. The windows are dark. Giza stands by the door, locking up. He smiles faintly as if pretending this is just another night. "Dr. Hirschfeld will be back soon," he says, but his voice wavers. You both know it's a lie. By 1932, the Weimar Republic is collapsing under its own contradictions, too free for the fearful, too fragile for the fearless. The cafes still glow, the bands still play. But beneath the glitter, everyone senses the countdown. The jokes have become brittle. The music sounds like memory. And yet, you can't help but admire the sheer audacity of it all. Berlin, even in its final hours, refuses to apologize for being alive. That's the tragedy and the triumph of Weimar. It built paradise in a storm, knowing the roof would one day blow off. When you finally step into the night, a single cabaret song drifts through the air, thin but unbroken. Life is a cabaret, old chum. The singer's voice trembles, but she finishes the line. Because in Berlin, you always finish the song, even when the lights start to go out. It's May 1933. The song is over. You return to Berlin to find the music silenced, the neon signs dimmed, and the laughter replaced by the sound of marching boots. The Weimar Republic, the wild, fragile experiment that once felt immortal, has collapsed into something dark and disciplined. Posters of smiling youth in brown uniforms cover the same walls that once advertised cabaret shows. You can almost hear the echo of applause fading under the sound of fists pounding in unison. The new Germany doesn't want complexity. It wants purity, obedience, order. And that means anything that doesn't fit the new ideal queer life, Jewish life, intellectual life must disappear. You walk past the Institute for Sexualwissenschaft, or what's left of it. The doors are shattered. The windows are gone. Books, thousands of them, lie in heaps on the pavement, torn and trampled. A crowd of young men in Nazi uniforms laughs as they toss more volumes into a growing fire. You recognize the titles. Hirschfeld's The Homosexuality of Man and Woman. The case files. The photographs. Decades of study turn to ash in an hour. Someone drags out a bust of Hirschfeld himself, a marble likeness that once greeted visitors at the Institute's entrance. They jeer and parade it through the streets before smashing it on the curb. You stand frozen, smoke stinging your eyes. The fire rises orange against the night sky. The books twist and blacken, curling like paper birds. You remember that graffiti from years ago, "We will burn it." They kept their promise. Hirschfeld is in Paris when it happens. He sees photographs of the burning in the papers and writes simply, "My life's work has been destroyed." he never returns to Germany. You wander through the silent city in disbelief. The bars are closed. El Dorado, the legendary club of the third sex, is gone. Its dance floor stripped and replaced by a Nazi youth office. The same police who once turned a blind eye now raid apartments at dawn, guided by lists compiled from those very institute files. It's as if the city itself has been rewritten, every note of jazz replaced with a drum beat. Some of the cabaret performers flee those who can. Anita Berber is long dead, but others like Claire Waldorf, the gravel-voiced lesbian singer of Berlin's nightlife, retreat quietly from public life. The drag queens shave their faces clean and take up respectable jobs. Lovers stop walking hand in hand. The freedom that once shimmered through the streets vanishes overnight. Not with a bang, but with the sound of doors locking. The Nazi regime revives paragraph 175, the old law against homosexuality, and strengthens it beyond recognition. Now even a glance, a letter, or a rumor can lead to arrest. Between 1933 and 1945, over 100,000 men are investigated under it. Many are sent to prisons. Thousands more end up in concentration camps. There they wear pink triangles, the symbol chosen to mark them as homosexuals. You see one such man at Sachsenhausen, his uniform torn, his head shaved. He's standing in line for roll call, shivering in the cold. The guards mock him, calling him 175er. They say it like a curse. For many years after the war, that number will remain unspoken, a scar even freedom can't erase. But even in the bleakest corners, fragments of Weimar's courage survive. Prisoners secretly pass notes of solidarity, small scraps of paper that say things like, "Hold fast," or "Remember El Dorado." A few survive long enough to whisper these stories decades later. It's not heroism as history usually defines it. No battles, no speeches. Just the quiet insistence of people refusing to forget who they were. As for Hirschfeld, he dies in exile in 1935, on his 67th birthday, far from the city he once loved. His grave in Nice bears a simple inscription, Per scientiam ad justitiam, through science to justice. The justice never came in his lifetime. When you walk through Berlin now, the silence feels deafening. The cafes still stand, but the conversations are gone. The streetlights glow, but they no longer illuminate anyone brave enough to be seen. The city has been drained of color, reduced to uniforms and flags. Still memory lingers in odd places. In a small attic in Schöneberg, someone hides a photograph of two men dancing. In a dusty drawer, a copy of Die Freundin lies folded between old ration coupons. A seamstress stitches an extra pocket into her coat to hide a love letter. History isn't always written in ink. Sometimes it's sewn into seams, smuggled between breaths. One night you find yourself standing at the riverbank, looking toward the city center. The reflection of the burning books from earlier still flickers in your mind. You wonder what Hirschfeld would say if he could see this, how something once so modern, so alive, could turn medieval in the span of months. Maybe he'd still believe what he always did, that truth can be destroyed, but not erased. The river moves on, carrying ashes, secrets, and the memory of a city that once dared to imagine love without fear. The fires die, but somewhere quietly and visibly, the embers keep glowing. The years blur together now, gray, rigid, suffocating. You no longer hear the piano from El Dorado or the laughter from the cabarets. Only the shuffle of boots, the bark of orders, the hum of propaganda on every radio. It's the late 1930s, and Berlin has become a city under glass, every movement observed, every whisper suspect. For queer life, which once danced in sequins under neon lights, the only survival now is silence. You walk the same streets you once strolled freely. They look the same cobblestones, same river, same buildings, but the spirit has been drained from them as if someone turned off the oxygen. Cafes that used to welcome artists and dreamers now display portraits of the Führer. Bookstores that once sold poetry now sell ideology. Even the word freedom sounds foreign. And yet, human instinct is stubborn. Beneath the uniformed precision of the Third Reich, people still find ways to reach one another. You hear rumors of hidden apartments, so-called Clubs der Freundschaft, or friendship clubs, where a handful of men or women gather quietly, pretending to play cards while exchanging glances and coded phrases. Do you remember the lake, someone might say, meaning, are you one of us? The conversation never lasts long. A knock at the door could end everything. At night, the trains rumble past, carrying prisoners to camps in Sachsenhausen, Buchenwald, Dachau. Among them are men marked with pink triangles, their names erased, their families told they are unfit. Most never return. Those who do emerge decades later to find that even the free world does not yet have words for their pain. The war will end, but for them, persecution will not. Still, even here, flickers of defiance survive. A handful of resistance members, queer Jewish communists, meet in secret to distribute pamphlets and smuggle people across borders. Among them is Willy Irmer, a young man once arrested under paragraph 175 who escapes prison and later hides fugitives in his Berlin apartment. I couldn't stop being myself, he'll say years later. So I decided not to stop helping others. The Weimar dream feels impossibly distant now. And yet, memories have a strange power. You find yourself recalling the smell of pine cologne, the warmth of a crowded dance floor, the rhythm of a jazz tune you haven't heard in years. Maybe that's how people survive regimes like this, not by forgetting joy, but by keeping a small piece of it hidden somewhere the law can't reach. One evening in 1941, you visit the ruins of the old Institute for Sexual Science. The building stands empty, its windows shattered, its rooms stripped bare. Yet if you listen closely, you can almost hear echoes, the sound of Hirschfeld's voice, lecturing, the click of a typewriter, the low murmur of visitors waiting in line. You wonder how many lives began in that building. How many found words there for things they had only ever felt? You find half buried in the rubble a scorched fragment of paper. Most of it is unreadable, but one sentence remains intact: love is not shame. It is the proof that we exist. You fold it carefully and slip it into your pocket, a relic of a vanished world. Outside, Berlin keeps marching. The radio blares martial anthems. Parades fill the squares. But look closely, and you'll still see the ghosts. The old men sweeping streets were once the poets of Weimar. The seamstresses stitching uniforms once sewed costumes for cabarets. Every city carries its buried lives, and Berlin carries more than most. As the war drags on, even the persecutors grow paranoid. The Gestapo raids grow frequent. A single accusation, often false, is enough to send someone away. Yet somehow in the cracks between fear, people still find each other. Two factory workers share a cigarette behind the warehouse, their fingers brushing briefly, dangerously. A woman on the tram slips a folded note into another's pocket. Meet me at the old river bridge. These moments last seconds, but they mean everything. By 1945, the city is rubble. The Allied bombs fall like a second judgment, erasing what tyranny hasn't already crushed. When the war ends, Berlin lies broken, its streets full of dust and ghosts. The pink triangles, the prisoners, the forgotten, they have no parades, no speeches, no medals. But they are part of the story now, even if no one wants to tell it. In the months after liberation, survivors emerge cautiously. Some reunite with lovers thought lost. Most find only graves. Many are still treated as criminals under the same paragraph 175 that sent them to camps. History, it seems, has liberated everyone except them. You stand in the ruins of what was once a cabaret. The piano is gone. The floor collapsed, but in the quiet you can almost hear the faint echo of a song. Low, fragile, defiant. Maybe someone hummed it while hiding, or maybe it's just memory replaying itself. Either way, it reminds you that even under the weight of oppression, the human heart still hums. The war is over, but the silence it leaves behind is worse than noise. Berlin is no longer a city of neon dreams, it's a graveyard of them. But deep in the rubble, among the ashes of books and the bones of walls, something small, something stubborn still beats. It's 1949. Berlin is divided literally and spiritually. The rubble has been cleared just enough to reveal new borders, new powers, new promises. The Americans, the Soviets, the French, and the British have all claimed their slices of the broken city. But no one seems to want its ghosts. And there are many. You walk through Schöneberg again, the same district that once glittered with laughter and saxophones. Now, it's quiet, cautious. But under that quiet, something stirs. You can see it in the way two men nod at each other as they pass in the street. In the way a woman in trousers holds her cigarette just a second too long before smiling at another across a cafe. The war is over, but the code remains. The first tentative attempts to rebuild a queer community come not from politicians, but from survivors, those who refuse to let memory die. A small group gathers in secret apartments to share stories, trade news, and drink to the ones who didn't make it. Among them are men who survived the camps, their pink triangle badges tucked away in drawers, too painful to display and too precious to throw away. One of them, Heinz F. A quiet man with gray at his temples, keeps a list of names. Each time he remembers another friend who vanished, he writes it down in a notebook. So they exist somewhere, he says simply. It's an act of rebellion through remembrance. But the new Germany, both East and West, isn't ready to face that part of its past. The Nazis are gone, but paragraph 175 remains. The same law, the same number, the same shame. In West Germany, courts continue to convict men for homosexuality well into the 1950s and beyond. Judges, some of whom once served under the Third Reich, now sit in black robes under new flags, claiming continuity of law. Imagine surviving a camp, only to be arrested again by your liberators. It happens. Still, Berlin is Berlin. In back rooms and quiet corners, resistance begins to take root again. Former cabaret musicians start playing in smoky bars using coded lyrics to speak what they can't say aloud. Writers publish short stories under pseudonyms, their characters' roommates or dear friends, the truth hidden in plain sight. And slowly, small acts of courage begin to reclaim the city. In 1951, the first post-war queer publication appears, Der Kreis, printed in Switzerland, but smuggled into Germany. It's modest, just essays, poetry, and personal ads, but it spreads like wildfire among those who remember what it felt like to belong. Letters flow across Europe again, connecting men and women who once thought they were the last of their kind. Meanwhile, in the East, life grows colder. The new socialist regime promises equality, but only of a certain kind. Private deviation, as the Stasi calls it, is treated as bourgeois weakness. Files begin to fill up again. Different uniforms, same suspicion. Yet even there, people find ways to carve out invisible networks, meeting under the guise of literary clubs or art circles. You'd be surprised how many revolutions begin with poetry readings. By the 1960s, Berlin is reinventing itself once more. Rock and roll replaces jazz, concrete replaces ruins, and the word freedom returns, but it's wearing jeans now. The student movement rises, demanding change, and for the first time in decades, young people speak openly about sexuality. Posters of Che Guevara share walls with graffiti that reads, "Love is not illegal." You stand outside a cafe called Anderes Ufer, the other shore. It's the first openly gay bar in post-war Berlin. Inside the walls are covered in old photos of Weimar drag performers. There's a framed picture of Magnus Hirschfeld above the counter, his face half shadowed by candlelight. The bartender, an older man with kind eyes, nods to it and says, "He started it all." The place feels sacred, not because it's loud, but because it's ordinary. People laugh, flirt, argue about politics. Couples hold hands without glancing over their shoulders. For a city that once made hiding an art form, that simple act is a revolution. One evening, a historian gives a talk here about the old Institute for Sexual Science. He brings a single surviving artifact, a charred book rescued from the 1933 burning. The crowd listens in silence as he reads a line from it. "To know love in its full truth is to know the soul of humanity." When he closes the book, no one claps. They just breathe together quietly. And so Berlin, brick by brick, memory by memory, begins to reclaim its lost self. The ghosts of Weimar walk again, not as warnings, but as witnesses. The cabaret songs return not to mock, but to honor. The laughter, when it comes, sounds different now. Softer, earned. You leave Anderes Ufer late at night and walk through the streets. The lights glow warmer than you remember. The air carries music again, different tune, same courage. And in that moment, you understand what Weimar really gave to the world, the idea that identity, no matter how fragile, always finds its way back to the surface. Berlin has fallen twice and risen twice. Maybe that's its secret. No matter how many times the world tries to erase it, the city simply waits. Like a song paused mid-note, ready to begin again, the moment someone dares to press play. By the 1970s, Berlin has a pulse again. Not the frantic heartbeat of Weimar, but something steadier, more self-assured, like a city learning to breathe after a long coma. The war is a generation behind the wall, is a decade old, and the world is changing faster than anyone can keep up. You can feel it in the music, the fashion, the language itself. Liberation is no longer whispered. It's printed on posters. You walk down Kurfürstendamm on a warm summer evening. The air smells of beer diesel and the faint sweetness of freedom. Long-haired students march with banners that read, "Make love not law," and 175 must go. It's a sight unimaginable 20 years earlier, protests, not for bread or borders, but for the right to love. The police stand nearby, unsure whether to laugh or intervene. Inside a small bookshop, a display catches your eye. Homosexualität, Plädoyer für die Liebe. A manifesto written by reformers demanding the final abolition of paragraph 175. It's been 50 years since Hirschfeld's institute was burned, and his ghost seems to hover over every page. His once radical ideas are now being spoken aloud, again on television panels, in classrooms, even in parliament. The same city that once torched his books is now quoting him. In West Berlin, the gay rights movement finds its rhythm. Activists organize under names like Homosexuelle Aktion West-Berlin HA for short. They hold meetings in smoky cafes, write pamphlets on borrowed typewriters, and stage kiss-ins in public squares. You watch one unfold near Nollendorfplatz. Two men embrace in the open, surrounded by cameras and curious onlookers. Some cheer, others frown, but no one arrests them. It's progress, messy, visible, irreversible. In the East, things move slower. Behind the wall, queerness remains taboo, but cracks are forming there too. A few brave souls form underground support groups, meeting under church roofs, disguised as youth Bible studies. It's a strange irony, faith providing shelter where politics will not. Decades later, they'll call these gatherings the seed of East Germany's own quiet revolution. You spend a night at Anderes Ufer again, that little bar in Schöneberg that never quite sleeps. The jukebox hums with Bowie's Heroes, a song written just across the wall. The crowd sways, half dreaming, half remembering. We can be heroes, Bowie sings just for one day. In Berlin, that line doesn't sound like fantasy, it sounds like prophecy. The faces here are different now, students, activists, drag queens, exiles, and a few older men who survived everything. One of them, a wiry man with silver hair, sits at the bar with a quiet smile. When someone asks if he remembers the old days, he nods slowly. I remember the laughter, he says, and the fear, but mostly the laughter. That laughter returns in new forms. Street festivals, art shows, zines. The spirit of the cabaret revives, but this time without hiding. Satirical theater groups parody politicians and priests, just like the old Weimar comics did. Only now, they perform outdoors in daylight, without fear of the police. Somewhere Hirschfeld's ghost must be smiling. In 1979, Berlin hosts its first Christopher Street Day parade, a small procession of a few hundred people marching with homemade signs. Out of the closets, into the streets, they chant. You walk alongside them through streets that once echoed with a different kind of march. The symbolism is impossible to ignore. Every drumbeat feels like an answer to the boots that once trampled these same stones. The city begins to reclaim its title as Europe's laboratory of identity. Artists, writers, and filmmakers flock to it, drawn by its rawness. Cabaret the film premieres in 1972 and becomes a sensation, reviving the Weimar legend for a new generation. Tourists come to see the city that danced on a volcano, not realizing it's still dancing, just to a different tune. You visit the restored building where Hirschfeld's Institute once stood. A small plaque marks the spot now. People stop to read it, snap photos, move on. But you linger. You imagine the old doctor's office filled again, not with fear, but with laughter, books, and light. The memory feels close enough to touch. Berlin's nightlife thrives again. Clubs like Chez Romy Hague and Metropole become sanctuaries for those chasing the same thrill Weimar once promised the right to exist loudly. Drag queens strut across stages, punk kids dye their hair green, and lovers dance until dawn. The city is still divided by a wall, but somehow its spirit feels more united than ever. Later that night, you stand by the River Spree. Across the water, spotlights sweep the East German sky. You think about all the lives that have passed through this city. Those who dreamed, those who died, those who refused to disappear. You realize something quietly miraculous. Berlin didn't just survive history, it outlasted it. The ghosts of Weimar are still here, but now they're dancing again in new clothes under new lights to new songs. And as the music drifts through the warm night air, you finally understand the Weimar dream was never destroyed. It simply went underground, waiting for a generation brave enough to bring it back into the open. The 1980s arrive with a roar, and a heartbeat of synth drums. Berlin is still divided, but somehow it feels like the most connected city on earth, two worlds staring at each other across a concrete scar, each pretending not to envy the other's freedom. On the western side, the queer scene has blossomed into something dazzling, political and deeply human. It's Weimar, reborn louder, prouder, and this time determined never to be erased again. You walk down Motzstrasse, past rainbow-painted doorways and posters advertising drag shows, AIDS fundraisers, and avant-garde theater. The air smells of beer sweat and cheap perfume, and the sound of laughter spills into the street. You can sense a quiet defiance in it, a joy sharpened by memory. The older generation, the ones who survived the gray decades, still come here sitting in corners, watching, smiling. They've seen how fragile joy can be. At Anderes Ufer, the bar has grown busier than ever. You step inside to find it packed with students, artists, and activists planning the next Christopher Street Day Parade, now a major annual event. On the wall hangs a faded photo of the first March 24 people holding a bedsheet banner. Beside it, a new photo shows tens of thousands flooding the streets. This, the bartender says, gesturing at both pictures, is what history looks like when it refuses to stay quiet. Yet under the laughter, another shadow grows: the AIDS crisis. It hits Berlin like a storm in slow motion. At first, no one understands what it is. Then, the fear begins. By 1983, friends start disappearing, one, then three, then dozens. Hospitals fill, funerals multiply. Politicians hesitate, newspapers sensationalize, and old prejudices rise again. God's punishment, some whisper, echoing the language of the 1930s. The same city that once prided itself on tolerance now wavers between compassion and panic. But Berlin remembers its past too well to surrender to silence. The queer community organizes quickly support networks, counseling centers, medical advocacy groups. The AIDS-Hilfe is founded, offering help without judgment. Activists stage protests demanding government response, public education, and empathy. You see posters plastered across walls reading, "Love does not spread fear, ignorance does." At a candlelight vigil in Nollendorf Platz, hundreds gather holding photos of the dead. The crowd is silent, the only sound the faint hiss of candles in the wind. You recognize faces in the photographs: performers, writers, bartenders, dreamers. The city feels their absence like missing notes in an old song. But grief in Berlin always turns into action. Within a year, benefit concerts and awareness events spring up across the city. A new generation of activists emerges, angrier, bolder, unstoppable. Amid this struggle, history begins to heal itself. In 1985, Berlin finally honors Magnus Hirschfeld, 50 years after his death, with a plaque on the site of his destroyed institute. At the ceremony, an elderly man speaks softly into the microphone. They burned his books, he says, but not his ideas. The crowd applauds, not wildly, but steadily, the way one claps for a promise finally kept. That same year, the city government begins funding LGBTQ community centers, something unimaginable even a decade earlier. Berlin's queer identity is no longer confined to basements and back rooms. It's out in the open, stitched into the city's identity. Even the police, once instruments of terror, now march in parades. The transformation feels biblical. And still, Berlin never loses its sense of irony. The same streets where Nazi rallies once thundered now host drag queens in feather boas. The same squares where books burned now hold open-air film screenings about Hirschfeld and Weimar cabarets. Every gesture feels like both a celebration and an act of revenge. Then one cold November night in 1989, everything changes again. You're standing among a crowd near Checkpoint Charlie as a rumor spreads the Berlin Wall is open. For a moment, no one believes it. Then someone climbs onto the concrete, then another and another. Soon the air is full of Cheers champagne and the scrape of hammers chipping away at decades of division. You look around and realize something profound. This isn't just a political moment, it's an emotional one. The wall that split families and lovers, the wall that turned whispers into survival tactics, is coming down. And as people climb, kiss, and cry on its surface, it feels as if every hidden love in Berlin's history has suddenly been set free. That night, someone sprays graffiti across a crumbling section. No more closets, no more walls. It glows under the streetlights like prophecy. The city rejoices, but beneath the celebration, there's a quiet recognition. Berlin has been here before the ecstasy, the optimism, the promise of new beginnings. This time, though, it's different. The ghosts of Weimar, of 1933, of every silenced voice hover over the crowd, not as warnings, but as guardians. They've seen what happens when freedom is taken for granted. You wander through the streets until dawn. People are singing, hugging strangers, passing bottles, laughing through tears. Somewhere faint but clear. Someone plays a saxophone jazz, like in the old days. The sound drifts over the rubble, over history, over everything. You close your eyes and realize that Berlin somehow has completed a circle. The Weimar spirit, the daring, the defiance, the beauty of being unapologetically alive has finally come home. Berlin has always been two things at once, a city that destroys and a city that remembers. It's the 1990s now. The wall is gone, the wounds are visible, and for the first time in a century, Berlin breathes as one. The streets are full of cranes, graffiti, and optimism. The air smells like rain on concrete and cheap currywurst. But beneath the construction dust, you can still feel the pulse of old Berlin. The same restless energy that once made cabaret singers, philosophers, and dreamers gather in dim-lit rooms to imagine something better. You walk down Nollendorfstrasse, once the epicenter of Weimar's queer life, now alive again with color. The old buildings still bear bullet holes, but their balconies wave rainbow flags. Cafes advertise oat milk lattes and queer poetry nights. A mural of Magnus Hirschfeld watches over the street, his expression kind, his gaze steady, as if he's quietly counting how many lives his ideas have touched. Every summer now, the Christopher Street Day Parade floods the city. 1 million people march through the same avenues where book burnings once roared. The floats shimmer with sequins, leather, and laughter. Drag queens wave from atop trucks while techno thunders through the air. The slogans are cheeky and profound. Love wins, where hate once marched. We're not a phase, we're the future. You see older marchers too, their faces lined, holding black and white photos of those who didn't live to see this day. One man carries a sign that reads, Paragraph 175, repealed but never forgotten. It wasn't until 1994 that the law was finally abolished, 60 years too late, but not too late for memory. Germany at last has begun to say sorry. That night, you sit by the Spree River as fireworks burst overhead. Across the water, the glass dome of the new Reichstag glows transparent by design, a political statement, no more secrets. Berlin has learned the hard way that transparency is the only kind of safety. Around you, people laugh, flirt, sing. You hear snippets of English, Turkish, Polish, Hebrew, a city rebuilt by the very diversity it once tried to erase. You wander through Schöneberg again, the same streets that once hid the forbidden. Now, bookstores sell queer history next to postcards of drag icons. Museums host exhibitions about Weimar's third sex. Young Berliners pose in front of the reconstructed El Dorado sign, half smiling, half reverent. They call it vintage, but you know it's resurrection. In 2008, a memorial for the gay victims of the Holocaust opens near the Brandenburg Gate. It's simple, a concrete block with a small window that plays a film of two men kissing, endlessly looping. Tourists pass, some curious, some uncomfortable. You stand there for a long time, watching the image repeat, soft, tender, defiant. For decades, such a scene would have meant arrest or death. Now it's enshrined in stone at the heart of Germany's capital. Berlin has become what Weimar once dreamed it could be, a sanctuary for those who live differently, love differently, think differently. The art is as bold as ever, the humor as dark, the beauty as strange. And though the city still wrestles with its contradictions, gentrification, politics, memory, it wears them openly, as if to say, we've already seen what silence does. You visit the Schwuls Museum, one of the world's first museums dedicated to queer history. Inside, there are photographs of the old cabarets, film reels, of Hirschfeld, lecturing diaries from soldiers, artists, and ordinary people who dared to write their truth. There's even a small corner devoted to Lili Elbe, the pioneering trans woman who once walked these same streets. Her portrait hangs beside a quote, "To live, to feel, to be myself. Was that too much to ask?" You stare at it for a long moment, realizing how much of her courage still hums through this city. As the evening fades, you walk back through the Tiergarten, the trees whispering in the breeze. It's quiet here, peaceful even. Somewhere nearby, a couple holds hands. The lamps cast soft pools of light across the path, the same path where soldiers once marched, where refugees once hid, where Hirschfeld once strolled home from his lectures. History doesn't disappear, it just learns to coexist. You stop by the water's edge, where the reflection of the city ripples like memory itself. Berlin's skyline glitters, TV tower, cathedral, skyscrapers all built atop layers of tragedy and triumph. You can almost hear the echo of the cabaret, the laughter, the defiance, the applause that never truly died. And as the city hums around you, you realize something: Weimar wasn't just an era, it was a heartbeat. It pulsed through oppression, through war, through silence, through revival. And it's still here, steady and soft, beneath the rhythm of modern Berlin. Every parade, every kiss, every song sung too loudly in the night is proof that the story didn't end, it evolved. You take one last breath of the cool air, the river scent, and the faint trace of jasmine from the park, and close your eyes. The ghosts of Weimar aren't haunting this city anymore. They're resting, finally content to let the living carry on the music. Berlin wakes early again, not with jazz this time, but with hammers, trams, and the clatter of tin lunch pails. The cabaret lights have faded, and dawn belongs to the workers now. You can almost smell the coal smoke, hear the factory whistles cutting through fog. So let's follow one of them, an ordinary Berliner, trying to survive an extraordinary time. The day begins before dawn, in a city that never quite recovered from losing a war. The streets of Berlin still smell faintly of coal smoke and yesterday's beer. You wake up on a straw mattress that used to belong to a soldier because everything in 1920s Germany used to belong to someone else. The window rattles with the morning tram, and you already know you're late. Your stomach growls, but the cupboard offers only a loaf of black bread that could double as a brick. You cut it anyway, spreading a thin scrape of margarine that tastes like damp paper. You eat in silence, staring at the newspaper headlines that talk about recovery, though no one you know seems to be recovering from anything. $1 American, the paper says, is now worth 4 trillion marks. You stop counting zeros somewhere around breakfast. Outside, the city yawns awake and gray. You step into the chill, pulling your patched coat tighter. The street is full of people who look like you, thin, tired, stubbornly alive. You pass a woman selling apples from a basket. She looks older than her wrinkles suggest. A group of veterans, one-legged and hollow-eyed, sit on the curb selling hand-carved trinkets that no one can afford. Somewhere down the street, a jazz band plays on a gramophone, scratchy but defiant. Berlin in 1923 is a contradiction, half despair, half experiment. The city is poor but alive, chaotic but creative. You can feel it in the air like a strange fever that makes people both dream and panic at once. There's a saying that's making the rounds. We dance because tomorrow we may starve. You wonder if that's true. At the factory gate, the line of workers stretches into the mist. The sign above the entrance reads, Borsig Lokomotivwerke, one of the biggest employers left standing. You've been here 3 years, ever since your brother didn't come back from France. The whistle blows sharp and merciless, and you shuffle forward with the others, clutching your time card like it's a passport to survival. Inside, the air is hot, thick with soot and steam. Machines roar louder than conversation, and the smell of oil sticks to your skin. You take your place at the line, turning bolts, checking pistons, wiping sweat with the same rag you've used for months. It's hard work, but it's work. That alone makes you luckier than most. Sometimes when the machines pause for maintenance, you talk with Carl, the man next to you. He used to be a teacher before the war lost his job when inflation made schools cut staff. Now he tightens bolts 12 hours a day. At least bolts don't argue, he jokes, wiping his glasses. You both laugh, but quietly. The foreman doesn't like laughter. Around midday, the lunch bell rings. You sit by the factory door unwrapping a single boiled potato and a slice of sausage so thin you can see daylight through it. Carl pulls out a piece of cheese hard as chalk. You trade half your sausage for a bite. It feels like a banquet. They say in America a worker eats meat every day, Carl says. Every day you repeat as if testing the words for flavor. The conversation drifts to politics, as it always does. Someone mentions the communists marching in Wedding last week. Another mutters that the Freikorps broke them up with clubs. No one trusts anyone anymore. You keep your opinions to yourself. Words can get you fired faster than bad work. When the whistle screams again, you go back inside. The air feels heavier now, filled with the smell of iron filings and sweat. The rhythm of the machines is hypnotic, almost musical clank, hiss, grind, repeat. Sometimes you imagine it's a kind of grim symphony, and you're one of its unseen musicians. Around 3 o'clock, a man from accounting walks through the floor handing out pay packets. You take yours already knowing what's inside paper. So much paper it barely fits in your pocket. But by the time you leave the factory, that paper will buy only a single loaf of bread. By evening, maybe not even that. You've started spending your wages during lunch breaks just to outrun inflation. It's a strange race. Money gets faster every day, and people get slower. When the shift ends, you pour out into the street with hundreds of others, all coughing, all blinking against the cold light. The sun sets early this time of year, but Berlin doesn't sleep early anymore. Somewhere a bar piano starts playing. Somewhere else a protest begins. You can't tell which direction the shouting comes from, and maybe it doesn't matter. For a moment you stand on the bridge, watching the smoke rise from the factories. The Spree River below reflects it all. Gray sky, gray, water gray lives, and yet you can't help thinking it's still beautiful in its own way. The city is broken, but it's moving. And so are you. The tram rattles toward home, packed tighter than a tin of sardines. You stand pressed between a baker's apprentice who smells faintly of flour and a nurse clutching a bouquet of wilted carnations. Everyone's tired, Everyone's broke, and yet somehow the tram conductor still manages to whistle. You wonder if it's habit or rebellion. As you sway with each jolt of the tracks, Berlin slides by in shades of gray and sepia. Posters plaster every wall. Political parties theater shows advertisements for beer you can't afford. A giant banner reads, "Vote for stability," but no one even looks up. Stability feels like an exotic luxury, the kind they only have in countries that still trust their money. You hop off near Moabit, where your apartment sits wedged between a butcher shop and a laundry. The building smells of cabbage-damp plaster and too many people. You climb 4 flights of stairs that groan under your boots. Inside, your mother is already waiting, ladling out soup, mostly water with a few pieces of turnip floating like survivors. She greets you with the same tired smile she's worn since your father died in 1918. "Any better at work?" she asks. You shrug. It's always the same answer, no, but we're still working. She nods as if that alone is something to celebrate. You eat in silence while your younger sister mends clothes by the window. Her fingers move quickly, patching holes on top of patches. The radio crackles in the corner, picking up a faint signal from a dance hall. A trumpet plays something jazzy, distant, full of longing. You close your eyes and imagine a world where music sounds that clean, where food tastes like something other than survival. After dinner, you step outside for a walk. The air feels sharp, clean, and a little desperate. You pass a line of people waiting to buy bread before tomorrow's price rise. They're quiet, resigned. A man at the front of the line jokes, "At this rate, we'll pay with wallpaper next week." No one laughs because it's true. Some people really are pasting their useless marks to their walls as decoration. You stop at the corner kiosk to buy a newspaper. The headlines promise a new plan to save the mark, but you've read those words too many times. You glance at the smaller stories instead. Art cinema scandal. There's a photo of Marlene Dietrich, all elegance and danger, performing in a cabaret downtown. You can't imagine how someone like her fits in the same city as you, but somehow you're both surviving the same storm. As the sky darkens, neon signs flicker to life. Even in ruin, Berlin has style. A few streets away, the nightclubs begin to wake music leaking out through cracked doors. You pause outside one, listening to the muffled rhythm of a jazz band, the syncopation foreign and thrilling. Inside, the people are laughing, drinking champagne that probably cost 1,000 marks a sip. You watch from the street unseen and wonder what it feels like to forget the world for even one song. A voice breaks your thoughts. Ernst, a co-worker, calling from across the street. He's still in his factory overalls, grinning like someone who refuses to give up. "Come on," he says. "The union's meeting tonight. We're talking about wages again." You follow him partly out of loyalty, partly because there's nothing else to do. The meeting hall is dim and crowded. Smoke curls to the ceiling as men and women argue their voices, a mixture of anger and exhaustion. Someone shouts about the government, another curses the bosses, another warns about the communists. You listen quietly, not sure who's right anymore. Every week, someone promises revolution, but all you've seen so far are new posters, new speeches, new chaos. When it's over, Ernst claps you on the shoulder. "Maybe next month things will turn," he says. You nod because hope costs nothing, and it's the only currency that hasn't collapsed yet. You walk home through empty streets, the city strangely still for once. The lamplight flickers over puddles, over posters, half torn by rain, over a child's shoe lying forgotten near the curb. Somewhere far off, a woman laughs too loudly, the sound echoing like a reminder that even despair has its soundtrack. At home, your sister is asleep on the couch, your mother knitting by candlelight. You sit by the window watching the fog roll in from the river. The candlelight trembles with every draft, but it doesn't go out. You think about that as you close your eyes, how the smallest flame can survive a whole city's worth of darkness. You wake before the sun again, not because you want to, but because the noise of the street won't let you sleep. Somewhere below your window, a horse neighs, a cart creaks, and a baby starts crying. You stare at the ceiling cracked like a map of forgotten promises. The day begins the same way it always does, with the heavy truth that rest is a luxury. Your mother's already up stirring coffee made from roasted barley instead of beans. It smells faintly of earth and disappointment. She hands you a cup, says, "Drink before it goes cold," and you both pretend it tastes like coffee. Your sister hums as she braids her hair a song from school that's older than any of you. You admire her for that, the ability to hum through hunger. Outside, Berlin is wrapped in fog thick enough to swallow the streetcars. You button your coat and step into it, the cold biting at your ears. The pavement glistens with last night's frost, and you walk carefully because even gravity feels political these days, always ready to bring you down. The factory looms through the mist like a beast half asleep. You join the others at the gate, stamping your feet for warmth. Carl greets you with a nod and a smirk. "Heard the boss is cutting hours again," he says. You sigh. "And wages?" Of course he says otherwise, it wouldn't be efficient. Inside, the machines begin their chorus. You can't help noticing how they sound, like 100 clocks all ticking towards something none of you understand. Oil metal sweated all mixes into a smell that sticks to your clothes and follows you home like a loyal curse. By midday, your back aches. Your hands are black with grease, and your thoughts drift somewhere else, anywhere else. You think about your father, who worked these same lines before the war. He used to say, "A good day is one where the machine doesn't win." You didn't understand it then, but now you do. Every turn of the wrench feels like a negotiation with the metal, a battle for dignity against the rhythm of production. During lunch, you sit outside with Carl again. Today's meal is half a turnip sandwich, no butter, no meat. He offers you a sip from his flask, and you take it. It burns your throat but warms your chest. "You ever think about leaving?" you ask. He laughs. "Leave where the world's falling apart everywhere else too. At least here we know the ruins by name." A few meters away, a group of younger workers argues about politics. One waves a red pamphlet in the air, shouting about solidarity and revolution. Another calls him a dreamer. "We don't need more speeches," someone mutters. "We need bread." The arguments are endless, circular, like the gears inside the machines. You listen, but you've stopped believing anyone truly knows how to fix this. After the break, the foreman shouts about productivity again, his voice sharp enough to cut steel. You work faster, your muscles burning. But you notice something strange. No one really listens anymore. Everyone just moves because motion is safer than standing still. At 3, the siren wails from across the street. A neighboring textile factory is on strike again. You hear chants, angry, rhythmics, brat. Arbeit word. Bread work, dignity. The foreman orders everyone to stay inside, but curiosity wins. Through the window, you see hundreds of workers flooding into the road, waving flags. Some carry signs, others just shout. The police arrive within minutes, boots thudding, batons raised. You don't need to see the rest. You've seen it before. When your shift ends, Carl disappears into the crowd. He's bolder than you. You linger at the corner, watching smoke rise where the protest met the law. It smells of sweat, fear, and something else, possibility maybe. You wonder what it would take for things to truly change. On your way home, you stop by a bakery. The shelves are nearly empty, and the prices have doubled since last week. The baker looks apologetic, but business is business. You trade a handful of nearly worthless marks for one stale loaf. Better hurry, he says, might be double by morning. You almost laugh what a miracle it would be if anything stayed the same. At home, your mother looks at the bread like it's treasure. She slices it thin, careful as a surgeon. Your sister toasts the edges over a candle, humming again. The smell fills the room, faint but comforting. You eat slowly, trying to make each bite last longer than the hunger that follows it. Later, you lie awake listening to the street again. The footsteps, the muffled laughter, the soft clink of bottles. Life goes on, stubborn as weeds through pavement. You think about tomorrow, but not too hard. Tomorrow always comes, but it never brings what it promises. You turn over, close your eyes, and let the hum of the city lull you to sleep, the same city that breaks you by day and rocks you by night. When life turns absurd, the only thing left to do is laugh, because in Weimar, Berlin, comedy wasn't an escape. It was survival. The alarm clock doesn't ring this morning. It was sold last week for a few coins. You wake instead to the sound of your mother arguing with the landlord downstairs. He's demanding rent. She's offering cabbage. This is what money has come to vegetables, as currency soup, as diplomacy. You wash your face in a bowl of cold water, watching your reflection ripple. The person staring back looks older than their years. There's a kind of weariness that no soap can clean away. You put on your work clothes, still stiff from yesterday's sweat, and head outside. The street is alive again, not with prosperity, but with invention. A man is selling newspapers printed on the backs of old posters. A woman hawks hot coffee, which turns out to be hot water with a single bean floating in it like a saint's relic. There's even a street performer juggling empty beer bottles, shouting, "The only thing we have more of than money are empty bottles." People laugh. It's not funny, but it's necessary. At the corner, you stop at a Zeitungskiosk to skim the headlines. Inflation has reached another record. The Reichsbank is printing notes so fast that the ink barely dries. There's a cartoon of a man burning banknotes for heat. It's satire, but also daily life. Carl joins you, waving a piece of paper. "Look," he says, "my nephew just drew this in school. It's a child's crayon sketch of a wheelbarrow full of marks. Teacher says it's modern art." Carl laughs, but I say it's a self-portrait of the nation. You both walk to the factory talking about rumors of layoffs. The foreman has been muttering about American loans and new management. No one knows what that means, but it rarely ends with higher wages. The shift passes slowly. The machines sound more irritated than usual, as if they too resent their own repetition. You think about the absurdity of it all, spending your life fixing metal while the economy collapses outside the door. It's like bailing water from a sinking ship with a sieve. At lunch, you and Carl sneak to a nearby alley where a man sells food from a cart. "2 sausages, please," Carl says boldly. The vendor shakes his head. 2 sausages. That'll be 200,000 marks. Carl fishes through his pockets, pulling out a handful of notes that look like theater props. "Will you take a song instead?" he jokes. The vendor smiles. "Depends on the song." Carl hums a few bars of a cabaret tune, something about love and bankruptcy. The vendor laughs and hands over 1 sausage to share. You split it in half, eating slowly, as if you're at a fine restaurant. Humor, you realize, tastes almost like hope when seasoned properly. Later that day, you hear a rumor that someone from the Berliner Zeitung is visiting the factory to interview workers about morale. You imagine what you'd tell them. Maybe you'd say, "Morale is what we trade for bread." Or maybe you'd tell the truth, that you still show up, still tighten bolts, still make jokes because to stop would mean surrendering to the absurdity. When the whistle blows, you leave the factory and wander toward Alexanderplatz. The city's heartbeat is louder here. Trams shouts the smell of roasted nuts mixing with exhaust. Street preachers cry about salvation, while pickpockets preach a faster kind. Every corner is an argument between chaos and creativity. You pass a crowd outside a cafe, laughing at a political cartoon posted in the window. It shows the government balancing on a stack of collapsing coins. The caption reads, "We're stable as long as no one breathes." You can't help smiling. Germans may have lost their money, but they haven't lost their sarcasm. That evening, Carl drags you to a cabaret near Tiergarten. "Come on," he says. "If the world's ending, we might as well dance while it falls." The place is small, smoky, and alive. A woman in a glittering dress sings a jazz version of Beethoven, her voice half angel, half mischief. The crowd cheers, claps, forgets for a moment that bread costs millions and jobs vanish overnight. You sip weak beer and listen to the band, a trumpet, a piano, a drum set that seems to be held together by hope and string. The lyrics are all jokes about inflation politics and love lost to unemployment. Everyone laughs, even the police officer at the door. You wonder if laughter is the last thing holding the city together. When the show ends, the performer bows and says, "Ladies and gentlemen, please remember to tip your waiters. They're all millionaires now." The room explodes in laughter. Even you join in belly-deep tears forming in your eyes. For the first time in weeks, it's not from hunger. You walk home under a moon that looks almost new. The sound of jazz still echoing in your head. The city glows faintly, like a candle that refuses to die. Maybe tomorrow, the money will change again. Maybe the world will too. But tonight, Berlin laughs, and so do you. The morning air smells faintly of coal dust and wet stone. You wake to a strange quiet, the kind that comes when the city is too tired to make noise. The paperboy hasn't come. The trams aren't running. Even the factory whistle, that harsh morning ritual, stays silent. You step outside uneasy and realize why it's a strike. Down the street, clusters of workers gather like storm clouds, angry, restless, shivering in the cold. Someone waves a red flag made from a stitched bedsheet. Another carries a sign scrawled in charcoal, "Arbeit nicht Almosen," work, not charity. The chants rise and fall, 1,000 voices carried on the wind. You join without thinking, because what else can you do? Carl finds you in the crowd, his coat unbuttoned, his face lit with something between hope and fury. "They can't keep paying us in paper," he shouts. "We're not fools." You want to agree, but part of you knows the truth, fools or not, everyone still has to eat. The police arrive before noon. Uniforms, pressed expressions, blank. They form a wall across the square, shields, gleaming. For a moment, no one moves. Then someone throws a stone. It arcs through the air like punctuation, and suddenly the sentence of silence ends. Chaos breaks open. Shouts turn to screams, flags to weapons, hope to smoke. You duck behind a cart as batons rise and fall. A woman beside you, her apron still wet from washing, yells at the officers, her voice trembling. "We fought for this country. You think we'll starve quietly?" The answer comes in the thud of boots. You pull her away as the crowd scatters. When it's over, the square looks like a battlefield, overturned barrels, torn banners, a single shoe lying in the gutter. The police march off, leaving silence behind them, the kind that feels heavier than noise. You stand among the debris, the red flag now trampled and soaked with rain. Carl limps toward you, rubbing his arm. "Nothing changes," he mutters. "Not the hunger, not the people. not the boots. You walk together toward the river, where the city always seems to collect its broken pieces. The water moves lazily, ignoring the drama above. Along the embankment, children play with coins, stacking them into towers, laughing when they topple. You realize they're using real money, the kind so worthless it might as well be toys. Carl sits on the wall and lights a cigarette. "You ever think this whole country's gone mad?" he asks. You nod. Mad but proud of it. He exhales smoke and chuckles softly. Then maybe we fit right in. In the afternoon, the trams start running again, and life resumes its strange imitation of normal. The strike fades like a dream, no victories, just bruises and stories. The newspapers will call it a disturbance. The officials will call it necessary discipline. You'll call it another Tuesday. At the factory the next day, the foreman pretends nothing happened. He scolds everyone for lost productivity and cuts shifts even shorter. You can't decide whether to laugh or cry, so you do neither. The machines roar back to life, and you join their rhythm. It's easier than thinking. During lunch, Carl tells a joke he heard from a machinist. What's the difference between a German mark and toilet paper? Someone answers, the mark doesn't absorb anything. The whole table bursts into laughter, loud, raw, genuine. Even the foreman smirks before remembering he's supposed to frown. When you return home that evening, your sister meets you at the door with a grin. "Look," she says, holding up a postcard. "It's from your cousin in America, the one who left years ago." The picture shows skyscrapers, shining cars, people in suits. On the back, he writes, "Here a loaf of bread costs the same every day." Your mother stares at the card like it's a magic spell. You can't decide whether to envy him or pity him for missing this beautiful mess of a city. You step out onto the balcony after dinner, watching Berlin shimmer under gas lamps. Despite everything, strikes hunger madness. There's still music drifting from a window somewhere, still laughter echoing through the courtyards. You think about the people you saw today, beaten and bruised, but still walking, still laughing, still here. Maybe that's what makes the working class invincible, not money, not politics, but the stubborn refusal to disappear. The factory whistle may silence you by day, the police may scatter you by noon, but by evening, you're all back again, alive and loud. Berlin may be falling apart, but it's doing so with style. You look down at the street and see a group of kids drawing on the pavement with chalk. They're sketching a factory smoke billowing from its chimney, and above it, they've written one word, Morgan tomorrow. You smile, wondering what kind of world they think that will be. You wake to rain, tapping against the window, a slow and steady rhythm that sounds almost gentle. The city outside is soaked, its edges blurred by mist. Roofs drip, gutters overflow, and the cobblestones gleam like black glass. For once you're grateful. Rain means fewer protests, fewer patrols, fewer reasons to run. You pull on your boots, still damp from yesterday, and step into the gray morning. The street smells of wet coal and onions. A newspaper vendor shouts headlines from under an umbrella. Government promises new stability plan. You don't even stop. You've learned that stability in Weimar Germany lasts about as long as a cigarette. At the factory gate, the usual crowd gathers, quiet, tense. The rumor this week is that the Americans are sending loans, the French are leaving the Ruhr, and prices might finally stop spinning. Maybe it's true, Carl says as he joins you, his collar turned up against the drizzle. Maybe next year we can buy bread without selling our shoes. You grin, or maybe we'll just eat the shoes. Inside, the machines sound different today, less furious, more tired. The whole place hums like a giant stomach digesting its own nerves. You fall into rhythm wrench and hand-body moving out of habit more than purpose. But your mind drifts. You think about what stability might actually feel like. Maybe it's the sound of silence between hammer blows. Maybe it's coming home and finding dinner already cooked. Maybe it's just one day without surprises. During lunch, the foreman calls everyone together. His mustache twitches a bad sign. "Listen up," he says, voice echoing through the hall. "Starting next week, the company's cutting half the workforce. Temporary measure." The room goes still. Even the machines seem to hold their breath. Carl swears under his breath. "Temporary," he repeats. Like the war was temporary. Like hunger's temporary. You don't speak. You just stare at your hands, calloused, scarred, stubbornly real. What good are hands when the world keeps finding ways to make them useless? When the bell rings, no one moves right away. A few workers mutter some curse, but most just keep working. What else is there to do? Hope doesn't pay rent, and anger doesn't feed families. By evening, the rain stops, but the city feels heavier. You walk home through puddles reflecting the dull yellow of gas lamps. The baker's window is empty again. The butcher's shop smells faintly of vinegar and disappointment. Yet somehow the cinemas are full lines stretching down the street. People will skip meals before they skip movies. You follow the crowd into one of the small theaters on Friedrichstrasse. The ticket costs nearly a day's wage. But for 90 minutes, you get to forget. The film is called The Last Laugh, about a hotel doorman who loses his job and his dignity. No one in the audience speaks, but you can feel the shared ache in the room. When the man on screen bows his head in shame, you hear sniffles in the dark. When he gets his small, impossible happy ending, everyone claps, not because they believe it, but because they want to. After the movie, you step outside into cool air that smells faintly of popcorn and rain. They call it the Golden 20s, Carl says beside you, appearing as if out of fog. But I think the gold's just paint. You nod. Still paint's better than rust. You stop by a bar before heading home. The place is half empty, the lights low. A piano player in a threadbare suit plays softly in the corner. Something slow, sweet melancholy. A woman at the bar smokes with elegant boredom, her lipstick perfect despite the gloom. "You boys from Borsig?" she asks. You nod. "Tough times," she says, "for everyone." Then she raises her glass. "To survival." You raise yours too, and for once the word doesn't sound hollow. When you finally return home, your mother is already asleep and your sister is sketching by candlelight. She shows you a drawing of a city skyline, tall, clean, modern. "Someday Berlin will look like this," she says confidently. You want to believe her. You really do. You tell her it's beautiful and you mean it. You sit by the window as the last tram rattles by. The air feels different tonight, not lighter, but clearer. You think about how every worker in this city is carrying something invisible, a piece of hope disguised as exhaustion. Maybe that's what keeps Berlin alive, not the politics, not the money, but the quiet persistence of people who still get up every morning, no matter how ridiculous it seems. You finish what's left of your barley coffee and let the warmth settle in your chest. Outside, a street lamp flickers, struggling but refusing to go dark. You smile at the irony. The whole city's like that lamp, cracked, buzzing, half broken, but still glowing anyway. Sometimes history doesn't break with explosions. It frays slowly like a rope unraveling strand by strand, until one morning you realize you're holding the end. It's 1929, and Berlin feels different. There's a strange calm in the air, as if the storm has passed or is waiting to begin again. The newspapers talk of prosperity of American loans and German rebirth. Politicians beam from photographs, factory owners give speeches, and even the cabaret singers have swapped their satire for love songs. You still wake at dawn, but now your pay actually buys breakfast. You step into the morning light, and for the first time in years, the city smells like bread. The baker's window is full again, real loaves round and golden, not the sad gray bricks of old. You buy one, break it in half, and feel the steam rise. It's soft, it's warm, it's almost indecently luxurious. Carl meets you on the corner, grinning. They say the mark is stable now. He says, waving a folded newspaper, stable. Can you imagine? You laugh, chewing slowly. If they keep saying it, maybe I'll start believing it. At the factory, things really do seem better. The machines run smoother, the foreman yells less, and the pay packets actually mean something. There's even talk of bonuses. A miracle, Carl mutters. Or a setup. He doesn't trust easy smiles, and neither do you. But you take the good days while they last. After all, Berliners have learned that happiness here is like sunshine, brilliant, fleeting, and always followed by rain. During the lunch break, you notice the younger workers are different from your generation. They don't flinch at sirens or hoard bread. They talk about cinema, jazz, and politics like games to bet on. One boy, barely 20, boasts about buying a record player. It's the future, he says proudly. Music in your own room. Carl shakes his head. Music used to be outside where you could share it. You think about that later on your walk home. The city has become louder, faster, more confident. Neon signs buzz over cafes, cars honk down Friedrichstrasse, and every corner glows with ambition. But beneath it, something feels off, like a clock that ticks just a little too fast. People have new shoes, but old debts, better wages, but restless eyes. You can't explain it, but the optimism feels borrowed. That evening, you meet Carl at a dance hall. The music is American brass, fast, joyful. Couples spin under electric lights, their shadows sliding across the polished floor. You're clumsy at first, but after a beer or two, your feet remember how to forget. The air is thick with perfume and cigarette smoke, and for a few glorious hours, the world outside doesn't exist. Then, out of nowhere, the bandleader announces a new song. It's from New York, called "Happy Days Are Here Again." The crowd cheers. You and Carl exchange a look that says, "Don't jinx it." But when the chorus hits, even you can't help smiling. For once, Berlin looks like it believes its own happiness. A few weeks later, the factory holds a celebration. The director gives a speech about national recovery and industrial progress. There are flags, sausages, and beer for everyone. You listen politely, clapping where appropriate, but something in his words feels rehearsed, like an actor reading lines he doesn't believe. Carl leans over. Whenever they start talking about the fatherland, he whispers, "Hide your wallet." The next morning, the newspaper headlines change. Something about trouble on Wall Street. You don't pay much attention at first. America feels too far away to matter. But by the end of the month, the orders at the factory slow down. By the next, they stop. Carl comes to work one morning to find his name on a list taped to the door. Dismissed temporarily, it says. He laughs bitterly. That word again, he mutters. You try to joke you'll have time to catch up on your reading. But it lands flat. The layoffs spread like fever. Shops close, queues return, and the baker's window empties again. The radio plays sad jazz, now slower, quieter. People stop dancing. Even the cabarets start making jokes about hunger again. It's like the city has snapped back into its old skin overnight. One evening, you walk past a newspaper stand and see a headline that makes you stop. American crash hits, Berlin hard thousands jobless. The photo shows men in suits outside a bank looking confused, afraid. They look just like you did 6 years ago. You realize then that maybe the world doesn't change. It just changes costume. Carl finds you later that night sitting on the bridge staring at the river. You see the news, he asks. You nod. Feels familiar, you say. He lights a cigarette and watches the smoke curl into the wind. Yeah, he says quietly. History's a comedian with bad timing. The two of you sit there in silence, the city humming faintly below. Neon reflections ripple in the water, like ghosts of better days. Somewhere far away, a band keeps playing stubborn as always. You close your eyes listening and realize Berlin's rhythm hasn't changed. It's just playing in a lower key. The winter of 1930 feels colder than usual, though the thermometer disagrees. Maybe it's the silence that freezes you, the silence of shuttered factories, quiet markets, and people who've run out of words for disappointment. Berlin has been through so many crises that even panic feels rehearsed now. You wake to frost on the inside of your window and the sound of boots crunching outside. Down in the courtyard, neighbors are burning scraps of wood for warmth. Your mother's cough echoes softly from the kitchen. She tells you there's still a bit of barley left for coffee, but no sugar. You drink it anyway, the bitterness sharp enough to wake the dead. The newspapers call it the Depression, as if sadness alone caused it. But you see what really happened. The American money left, and everything that looked new suddenly aged 10 years overnight. Shops that used to sell radios now sell pawnbroker signs. The butcher has started cutting meat thinner, calling it modern portions. Carl comes by with a smile that doesn't reach his eyes. Got work for a day, he says. Loading coal off the trains. Pays almost nothing, but it's something. You go with him because the alternative is sitting at home and thinking too much. At the train yard, men swarm around the freight cars like ants. No one talks much and conversation wastes breath, and breath is energy. You shovel black dust until your arms ache. When you stop to rest, you watch the soot rise like fog and realize it's probably the closest thing to magic left in this city. Later, while the foreman's distracted Carl slips you a piece of bread wrapped in newspaper. My mother saved it, he says. Said you looked thinner than the dog. You laugh weakly. Tell her she's right. He grins. Already did? On your walk home, you pass a queue outside a soup kitchen that stretches around the block. The sign reads, "Free meals for the unemployed." You almost join, but keep walking. Pride is a fragile thing, but sometimes it's all you have left. By the time you reach your street, night has fallen. The lamps glow weakly through the fog, each one a tired little moon. A man stands on a corner, handing out leaflets. Change is coming, he says. Real change. You take one without looking, another promise printed in black ink on cheap paper. At home, your sister reads aloud from the leaflet. It's political. Of course, they always are. National renewal, strong leadership, unity. Words that sound good when the stomach's empty. Your mother frowns. We've heard this before, she murmurs. Different uniforms, same speeches. You lie awake later thinking about that. Every time the city gets desperate, someone shows up promising salvation. You've started to wonder if chaos isn't the disease, but the business model. The next week, Carl tells you there's a rally near Brandenburg Gate. You should see it, he says. They've got flags, drums, torches, the works. You hesitate, but curiosity wins. The crowd is enormous, thousands of people packed shoulder to shoulder, shouting slogans that sound like hymns. On stage, a man in a brown uniform speaks with fire in his voice and fury in his eyes. He talks about betrayal, pride, and revenge. The words are intoxicating, like cheap wine, strong at first, sickening later. You watch faces around you light up with belief. Ordinary people, shopkeepers, clerks, veterans, nodding, cheering, clapping like salvation just walked on stage. Carl leans over, whispering, "Well, at least someone's offering answers." You don't reply. You're too busy wondering what questions they'll stop people from asking in return. When the speech ends, the crowd erupts into song, patriotic, thunderous. The sound fills the night like a drumbeat. You step back uneasy. You've heard this rhythm before long ago, when the war drums beat for glory and sent your brother to die in France. The next day, posters appear across the city, red, white, black. Faces painted on walls, slogans in bold letters. Order, honor, work. The words look clean, almost comforting. You can see why people cling to them. Order promises certainty, honor promises pride, and work promises food. 3 lies wrapped in one truth. Everyone is tired. Weeks pass and the streets begin to change. The rallies grow larger, the flags brighter. Men in brown uniforms patrol corners, calling themselves protectors. Others vanish quietly, journalists, unionists, the loud ones. The jokes in the bars grow quieter. The laughter doesn't last as long. You still meet Carl sometimes at the bridge. He's changed shaves, cleaner, talks about strong leadership now. Maybe this time they'll fix things, he says. Maybe discipline's what we needed all along. You want to remind him that discipline built the trenches too, but you bite your tongue. You've learned that disagreeing in public has become a dangerous hobby. The city feels like it's holding its breath again. Prices have stabilized, but the mood hasn't. People walk faster, talk softer. There's still jazz at the cafes, still laughter at cabarets. But underneath it all, something's turning. One night you pass the same cinema where you once saw The Last Laugh. Now a new film plays, one filled with patriotic music and soldiers marching in perfect formation. The crowd inside cheers. You stand outside watching the posters peel slightly at the corners, the glue failing in the cold. It feels like the whole country's stuck halfway between theater and nightmare. You head home, collar pulled up against the wind. The streets are quiet, too quiet for a city that once lived on noise. Somewhere far away, a band still plays jazz, faint and defiant. You stop and listen for a while. Maybe it's just your imagination, but the song sounds older, sadder, wiser. And you realize that even when history repeats itself, Berlin never loses its soundtrack. Spring returns, but Berlin doesn't bloom, it stiffens. Flags hang from every window now, all the same color, all the same size, as if the city itself has been ironed flat. You walk through the streets and realize something has changed, not in the buildings, but in the people. Eyes meet less often. Conversations end faster. The jokes that used to fill the trams are gone, replaced by silence heavy enough to feel like weather. The newspapers print only one kind of story these days, the kind that claps instead of questions. Even the headlines sound proud and hollow. At the same time, Germany rising again, order restored, the future belongs to the nation. You used to roll your eyes at such slogans. Now you just turn the page, because it's safer to act like you agree. At the factory, the changes come quietly, but quickly. A new foreman arrives wearing a party pin on his lapel. He's young, clean-shaven, and too confident for someone who's never held a wrench. "We're modernizing," he says in his first speech. "Discipline, loyalty, and productivity. Those are our values." The men nod cautiously, but no one cheers. Carl does, though. You watch him from across the floor, clapping harder than anyone. His eyes dart toward the foreman, waiting for approval. Later, during break, you sit with him behind the loading dock. You really believe all that you ask? He shrugs. Believe no, but it's safer this way. And besides, look around. The trains run on time. There's food again. People have jobs. He gestures at his lunch, a proper sandwich for the first time in years. Maybe this is the price of peace. You don't argue. The truth is, you understand. Fear disguised as gratitude looks almost the same as loyalty. That evening, on your way home, you pass a group of men painting over old posters, union slogans, theater ads, political flyers. The red paint drips like blood down the walls. When they finish, they paste new posters, one man's face square-jawed and smiling under bold black letters. You stare at it for a long time, then keep walking. The street seems narrower now. At home, your mother sits by the radio knitting slowly. The announcer's voice fills the room steady and warm like a lullaby. He talks about national pride rebuilding purity. Your mother doesn't look up. It's happening again, she says softly. I can feel it. You want to tell her she's wrong, that this time is different, but you can't bring yourself to lie. In the following weeks, people start disappearing. First, it's a neighbor, a journalist who once printed satirical cartoons. Then a teacher who refused to salute during assembly. Then, a machinist from your factory rumored to be a communist. No one says their names aloud. No one asks questions. Berlin, once the loudest city in Europe, has learned how to whisper. One day on your way to work, you see a crowd gathered at the station. A man in uniform is shouting, holding a clipboard. Names. We need names of un-German elements. The people shift uneasily, but some step forward eager to prove their loyalty. You recognize one of them, Carl. His voice is calm, almost proud, as he gives the officer a list. You don't know who's on it, but you know what it means. When he catches your eye later that day, he doesn't flinch. Don't look at me like that, he says quietly. I'm just surviving. You nod, but inside you feel something crack, small, invisible, irreversible. The factory installs new loudspeakers. Every morning they play martial music before work begins. Every afternoon the foreman reads a message from the party. The words blur together after a while: discipline, unity, destiny. You stop listening, focusing instead on the sound of the machines. Metal at least doesn't lie. At night you start walking longer routes home, avoiding crowds and lights. One evening you find yourself by the Spree River again. The water moves slowly, as if it too is pretending not to notice what's happening. Across the bridge, soldiers march in perfect rows, their boots striking in rhythm. You realize that this is what order sounds like: loud, efficient, and merciless. You lean on the railing, watching reflections ripple in the dark. You think about Carl, about the crowds, about the red flags replaced by black ones. You think about how quickly survival turns into obedience, and obedience into belief. Behind you, a gramophone plays faintly from a nearby cafe, an old cabaret tune from better days. The lyrics drift through the damp air. Life is a cabaret old chum. The irony is cruel, but you still smile. Somehow, even in a city that forgets music, remembers. When you finally head home, the streets are empty except for the posters. They glow faintly in the lamplight faces, slogans, promises. The same promises you've heard all your life, only now with better printing. You reach your door, glance once more at the silent city, and think maybe this is how freedom dies, not with a bang, but with applause. By the time history realizes, it's repeating itself. The people living inside it are already too tired to notice. It's 1933 now. The flags are everywhere on schools, factories, even bakeries. You wake to the sound of marching again boots echoing through the courtyard like thunder rehearsing for a storm. The radio blares from a neighbor's window, the same voice that's been filling every home. Steady, confident, full of certainty. Certainty, you've learned, is the most dangerous sound in the world. The factory still runs, but it doesn't feel like work anymore. It feels like obedience. You line up each morning beneath a banner that reads, Ein Volk, ein Reich, ein Führer. The foreman no longer needs to shout. Fear does the job for him. The air feels heavier now, as if every breath requires permission. Carl doesn't work beside you anymore. He wears a uniform now, neat and brown, and carries himself differently, straighter, louder. When you pass him in the street, he salutes, smiling just enough to make it hurt. Things are better now, he says once, clapping your shoulder. You'll see. Discipline builds nations. You nod, but the only thing you see are the empty windows on your street families who vanished overnight, apartments stripped bare, silence replacing their laughter. The newspapers praise a new dawn. The city's cleaned up. The cabarets have closed. The jazz clubs have been raided. They say the music was un-German. The laughter was immoral. You stand outside one shuttered club one evening, the sign half torn, but still legible, El Dorado. You remember the music, the sweat, the joy that once spilled through its doors, and you think how strange it is that joy could ever be called criminal. One night you hear shouting in the courtyard. You rush to the window. 2 men are being dragged away, accused of spreading foreign ideas. Their neighbors watch in silence, some peeking through curtains, others turning away. Your mother grips your arm. Say nothing, she whispers, not even here. You realize then that silence has become its own language. Days blur. The newspapers keep smiling. The radio keeps talking. The parades keep marching. The city hums with precision, but not with life. People move like gears, well-oiled, replaceable, turning without thought. Even the children in the courtyard now march in formation, singing songs about loyalty. Your sister refuses to sing. It doesn't sound like a song, she says softly. It sounds like a warning. You start keeping a small notebook hidden beneath your mattress. In it, you write what you see, the banners, the arrests, the quiet disappearances. You don't know why. Maybe it's an act of defiance. Maybe it's just a way to prove you're still paying attention. Then one morning you arrive at the factory and find the old gate replaced with a new one bearing the party's symbol. The walls are cleaner, the uniforms sharper, but the air feels suffocating. The foreman reads out names people dismissed for being unreliable. You wait for yours heartbeat, loud in your ears. It doesn't come. Not today. By evening, you've had enough. You take a long walk through the city, tracing your steps from the past decade, the bridge by the Spree, the market on Moabit, the alley where you once ate half a sausage with Carl. Everything looks the same, but feels different, as if the color's been drained out of it. Even the smell of coal seems subdued, domesticated. You stop by the river, where the water moves like time itself, slow, indifferent, unstoppable. You think about all the versions of Berlin you've seen, the hungry one, the laughing one, the dancing one, the hopeful one. You realize they're all still here, layered on top of one another, like memories pressed into stone. As you stand there, a column of soldiers crosses the bridge, their boots pounding in perfect rhythm. The sight is almost beautiful if you ignore what it means. You wonder how many people watching from windows feel the same mixture of awe and dread. Maybe that's the trick: make fear look like order, and people will mistake it for peace. The sun sets behind the Reichstag, glowing red through the smoke. For a brief moment, the city looks almost serene. You close your eyes and remember laughter, jazz, cheap beer, and the sound of hammers in the morning. You remember Carl's jokes, your sisters humming your mother's quiet strength. You remember how people once believed they could build something better. You open your eyes again, and the lights of the new Germany blaze against the darkening sky. You know that someday, this too will end. No empire lasts forever. History will turn, as it always does. But for now, Berlin keeps marching. You head home slowly past the posters, the flags, the soldiers, the silence. The city that once taught you how to laugh is now teaching you how to whisper. You think about how strange it is to survive so many versions of the same story. And as you climb the stairs to your apartment, you realize that the hardest part of history isn't living through its chaos. It's recognizing when the chaos starts wearing a uniform. The city sleeps again now, its noise dimmed to a hum beneath the rain. You close your eyes and see every version of Berlin, the laughter, the hunger, the music, the silence folding into one long heartbeat that refuses to stop. The workers, the dreamers, the ones who vanished and the ones who remained. They all drift together in memory, still hammering, still dancing somewhere in time. You breathe in the ghost of coal and coffee, of struggle and pride, and let it soften into calm. The machines are quiet now. The river keeps moving, and history, like sleep, begins again.